Hello, everyone, and welcome to our a combo event. It's a first Friday event here at ELO, and it's also a monthly ELIT reading group sponsored by the Hacks Lab. And we're very happy to have you all here, and we're very excited to have our guest speaker today. And it is my pleasure to introduce him, who's a very close personal friend and also also one of my chief collaborators in the world ever, and who again, but let me start with the formal introduction. Rob Wittig plays at the crossroads of literature, graphic design, and digital culture. He co-founded the legendary Insomnia electronic bulletin board with the surrealist style literary and art group Invisible Seattle. From this came a Fulbright grant to study the writing and graphic design of electronic literature with philosopher Jacques Derrida. I'm sorry, I apologize, in Paris or Paris. Rob's book based on that work, Invisible Rendezvous, was published by Wesleyan University Press. He then embarked on a series of illustrated and designed email and web fictions. Alongside his creative projects, Rob has worked in major publishing and graphic design firms in Chicago, leading R&D teams. Rob holds a master's in digital culture at the University of Bergen, Norway. He's currently developing high design collaborative fiction in a form called Netprov, Networked Improvised Narrative. Rob directs Meanwhile Netprov Studio with me, and his book, Netprov, Improvised Literature for the Classroom and Beyond, appeared in fall of 2021 from Amherst College Press, and it's about to be launched today. So everybody give whatever kind of round of applause you want to give for our guest and our wonderful speaker today, Rob Wittig.
Double check that.
Wow,
there we go.
That's interesting. Okay. I wonder when it stopped.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, folks, we're resuming the recording here. Okay. For those of you who are watching this after the fact, you missed some crucial things, but you can try to imagine what they may have been.
Yeah, and of the things that you missed, if you see people's faces covered with like whipped cream and stuff, we'll have to explain that later, but sorry you missed that. Hi. This book has just come out, and it celebrates and archives in a way, and thinks about and offers tips from experience about a decade of playing in available media in the form of Netprov. And so what I just did is just a tip for those of you who teach of something that might be fun for you to try. In my classes where I get to do mostly Netprov, or some of the creative writing classes where it's going to be, Netprov is going to be a major part of what we do, I like to start silently. I like to start in writing to kind of underline the difference between spoken language and written language. And one of my favorite examples that I have a little rhapsody about in the book is when this wonderful thing where people take their fingertip and on the surface of a dusty automobile, they write, "Wash me." There it is. That's literature. That's Netprov, all in 2 words, because it makes a series of very complex things happen in the brain. It's like the car is addressing you. The medium in which it's communicating is the topic of the comment, the dust, and all those kinds of things. So, but I like to start in writing. And here's my tip. What I do is I will stand up to the whiteboard in the classroom. I'm friendly and I greet students as they come in, but I don't say anything. And then when they've kind of settled down, I start writing on the whiteboard, and I write my name, and then I write some other kind of historical figures and things. And then gradually over the course of a minute or two, they get stranger and stranger. And the connections, there's sort of historical figures and pop culture and just odd, strange things. And then I turn around and tell them that this is an example of what I consider the basic impulse of Netprov. And that is a long ongoing project I call Mysterious Whiteboard Notes. And I encourage everybody to do that whenever you're on a university campus or any kind of, even a workplace, is to, when there's nobody around in a room that has a whiteboard, leave mysterious notes on the whiteboard designed to create the following impression when people go into that room, which is you want the people who walk into the room to look at that whiteboard and say, what the hell were they talking about in here? So anyway, that's a way to start. And I recommend that to you. So yes, the book has come out. It's free. It's open source. And I would say, to just summarize the kinds of things that are in it, there's tips like that. There's practical things you can do with a group of friends. There are recipes for big and small Netprovs, and tips for Netprov players to have more fun or kind of increase the depth of a Netprov. There's documentation and kind of a deep dive into a number of Netprovs, because I certainly find as a creator that examples of previous work is very inspiring. And then there's some history and critical theory, ways of thinking and ways of comparing the early stages of other art forms with this early stage of this art form. So just a tiny bit of personal history for those of you who may know my work in some level, but may not have been acquainted with kind of the origins of my love of collaborative writing. It started in Seattle, and it started Seattle kind of before Seattle was cool, when Microsoft was still just up and coming. And there I was, a young poet, a young novelist, slaving away, but I wanted to do things in different forms. And there was at that time this vibrant telephone pole poster culture. And among the many interesting, cool underground art posters that I saw was this poster, which turns out years later, that I remember very vividly, it turns out years later, I found out that this poster was made by Joellen Rock, currently my love and wife, and also a professor here at UMD. And it was in the context of that kind of poster culture that I started doing kind of poster poems that weren't in the forms of poetry. They would pretend to be a poster for a garage sale, but this one says, about as unlikely as seeing a garage sail into the sunset, and blah, blah, blah. So it's a close and far thing. This is an application, a bureaucratic application for reincarnation, with lots of caveats that you're not going to get to be who you want. This is a partial instruction list written in kind of garbled instruction style for building a night full of dreams. And it starts in the middle and ends in the middle. It's just a single page of a multi-page document. So it was in that context that I came across this wonderful publication by a group of people who similarly were inspired by the French surrealists and kind of had an absurdist performative sense of humor, called Invisible Seattle, who had the year before, who had redrawn the map of Seattle and done wonderful public events, and who handed these art books out, redeemable for art. And the thing that I love about this, void without face, the implication was that your own creative participation had to complete it. And I loved that spirit. As a kid, my favorite moments were creative collaboration with other people. So all of a sudden I found myself in a group of people reminiscent of the wonderful kind of photos and accounts of the daily cafe meetings of the surrealists. And with that group, we did a number of different projects, but the biggest of which was a crowdsourced novel. Philip Woolstetter, the godfather of Invisible Seattle, realized that there was no great novel of Seattle yet, like other cities had great novels about them. And so he said, well, we need to write the great novel of Seattle. And then that kind of combined with another kind of partial idea, which was this vision of a book signing event at which everyone who attended had the right to sign the book. Like, how would such a book come to be? So computers were an up and coming thing. And so we decided we would attempt to build a novel, a crowdsourced novel, using computers. So this is me rocking the 70s mustache. And as we went out as literary workers, and we would walk up to people and say, excuse me, we're building a novel. Can we borrow a few of your words? And wonderful sculptor, Claire Colquitt, built this walk-in computer, Scheherazade 2. And then inside were just simple word processors. It was not very digitally complex, but conceptually kind of forward-looking. And people were invited to enter text on repurposed video game consoles. They edited, they were able to see the results as they came out and edit things up on the walls. And the clues, it was a detective story, was the framework of the story. The clues for the story were put out in these vitrines so people could see them. And I just never had so much fun in my life. I was using every part of my knowledge of art and art history and literature and literary history and creativity and social skills and like everything to build this living work of art. Here's novelist Ken Kesey contributing his part. And I do in fact know which line is his, but I'm sworn to secrecy, so I will never tell. And it was from this sense that we could do, one of their phrases was, we do the hard part so you can do the fun part of literature. So to invite people, and the hard part being kind of some of the structuring, and the fun part being just this, the tons of fun that we had playing with things. So if you're interested in those projects, my first book is a detailed account, but what that left me with was this deep sense of how much fun there could be if people with a kind of professional literary background or kind of artistic experience would build a trellis. And this is one of the images that we most love these days, to build a trellis on which other people's creativity can grow. So just a premise to start with, some plot points and so on, and what could happen. So Netprov, as it gathered in my mind through various projects, began to have these kind of different definitions. And this is the current one, but it's all sort of still under development. And the basic thesis of the book is very simple. That I believe that the Netprov is something, we did not invent it by any means. People do it all the time, but Mark and I and the other Netprov featured players just aim to get really good at it. Because I know, I just am convinced to the depths of my soul that it is an art form, and that if we pay attention to what works and what doesn't, and how to get the best results out of ourselves and encourage the best results out of collaborators, we can make it something really important and lasting. I deeply believe that. So from a kind of a critical thinking, historical point of view, Netprov comes from a number of different backgrounds, and it's just always constantly very interesting to talk to people who have come into Netprov from these different backgrounds. They have very different ways of thinking about collaboration and stuff. And one of my favorite examples is just the difference between how the people from the literature background, where there's a millennia old tradition of libraries and collections of text, think about archiving a Netprov as opposed to theater people. Because as you probably know, it is forbidden to make a videotape, for example, of a stage play by the rules, the legal rules of equity acting, that leaves the theater. No recorded copy of a stage play may leave the physical confines of the theater. So stage actors and theater people, it's like, it's an ephemeral thing. We do our best and then we move on, and then archiving is not a big deal. So there's lots of fascinating contrasts and opportunities, inspirations that come from these different fields. And so there's a lot of that in the book as well, of like, what can Netprov learn from games? What can Netprov learn from just native social media things, from film and TV and fan fiction and things like that. So examples of Netprovs, for those of you who may not be familiar, just are refreshers of things that you may have seen. So a great example, an easy entry Netprov is 1 week no tech, which we've done several times, and I think we're going to do again in the next couple of years, which is you pretend to go without social media, pretend to get off your devices for a week, and then you complain and tweet the hell out of it in your preferred social medium. So like, here's me, here's all the things that I did, that I do now that I'm not on my phone, and you document it all. And it's just, it's basically a single joke, but it turns out to be a very evocative way of having people playfully reflect on their own social media habits. Another example of a Netprov, so collaboration. So this is one where I'm going to read the invitation, and I talk a lot in the book, and Mark and I have talked for years about crafting invitations to Netprovs, and personally, it's one of my favorite kinds of writing, is the invitation. So memorize rebuilding our lost past, one pick at a time, and I'll indulge myself by reading this out loud. Memorize is a support group for those who lost their online social scrapbooks in the Memories Incorporated server fire and bankruptcy. So it just is playing with the idea that's certain to happen, but people are very reliant on clouds and their social media platforms to keep their own personal family images, and they have no obligation to keep them, and they won't. At some point, they will disappear. So what we said was, as a creative project, to recreate your family photos with household objects. So this is a couple on their honeymoon, their beautiful Hawaiian honeymoon, and pictured with a pen and I think a thing of mints. Here they are under the volcano in Hawaii, having a great time. And it's one of the many, many discoveries of things that works so well with students, is that there is an overwhelmingly common communication form that, again, can become with a bit of just a slight change in attitude and a slight focus on how can we make this better, is an art form. And that is a photograph accompanied by a short caption. It is the lingua franca of kind of social media, images and captions traveling together. So this is a way of using a little bit of estrangement to play with that as a form in itself. And what I talk about in the book, and what I like to talk about with students too, is just to remind them of the early phases of art forms that we know in their maturity, like the novel. And how, you can have any kind of title and any kind of anything, you put it on the cover and it says something on novel, and then there's an author's name, and everybody kind of knows what that is. But I always love to remind students that a novel considered one of the earliest English language novels has this actual title page. And it's something, again, I've worked with students for years. It's like, go to libraries, go to special collections and look at older books. They don't behave the way that you think they do. And don't take the Norton anthology version of things as the real thing, because that we don't need to look at other mature forms, because we're in a time of origins and beginnings. We need to be, our historical research as kind of students and scholars, I think, it has to be in large part about early stages of forms. So I love that, number one, that this title, the real title of what we call Robinson Crusoe, mistakenly, is this long, long title. And new artworks of all kinds often have to do lengthy explanations to their initial audiences to kind of introduce them. But the thing that I particularly love about it is it says, blah, 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 and he was strangely delivered by pirates line, and then it says written by himself. In other words, by Robinson Crusoe. And the thing that people may forget is that Daniel Defoe went to his grave insisting that Robinson Crusoe was a real person and had written a real thing. Because the whole idea of fiction, where you use realistic names and describe things realistically, but it's made up, that was not a thing in culture yet. That had to be negotiated over a period of about 20 years before people kind of understood, and they wouldn't either sue you because they thought you were talking directly about them, or that they would think that it was a real person. So among my early inspirations was Mark Marino's episode where he turned his Twitter account over to a work study student, and that student kind of ran off with his account and did various entertaining things. A lot of people were very concerned, but it turned out to be a fiction. It was an impulse very much like the impulses that I'd been having of finding new forms that people were communicating in everyday life, and beginning to say, what happens when you turn this into fiction? What happens when you do fiction in this source? And another early one, I think Gene Schromick was here, the great Gene Schromick, one of our key featured players, was part of this project. But this is an early project for me called Chicago Soul Exchange, which I think if we were to do it again, which I'd like to as a Netprov, we would just simply call Soul Exchange. This is predicated on the proposition that there are more human beings alive now than the sum total of human beings that have lived in the past, and therefore that it's not possible for everyone to have a past life. So Chicago Soul Exchange is an imagined eBay for reselling past lives if you want one and you don't. And there's sort of a woman who runs it. The past life maven is the run of this little kind of homespun site, and Gene Schromick did a fantastic job of playing that role. And then, as part of what people could contribute, is you can contribute things for the catalog, for the past lives for sale. The rule being, in a way that I hope you don't hate me for finding it both very moving and dark and sad and also kind of funny, you sum up a human life in 2 sentences. Is the systems, the eBay system for past lives, is like, that's what you got. You got 2 sentences. And of course, most of them are agricultural workers, and everybody's looking for, princes and knights and princesses and, fancy folk. And then the plot of this one, it sort of takes place on this blog of the company and the website of the company over the course of a week. And what happens is that an actual knight comes up, and somebody's unmuted. If you could just make sure everybody, if you're to mute yourself. So anyway, and then basically that knight turns out to be even more valuable than the past life maven thinks, and then a kind of a shady Russian conglomerate comes in and buys it up, and the company, the week ends with the company kind of being forced out of business. But anyway, that was an early piece that was a big inspiration. So working with Claire Donato and Jeff T. Johnson, who came to us with a fantastic idea by Claire, she just said, well, let's be ourselves in high school for a month in Twitter and see what that's like to be. And then as we kind of mulled this over and thought about it, Mark Marino added, like, well, what if everybody who's ever lived is also in this same high school? So that's the all-time high where everybody is there. And this one, we went for a month. We organized it in terms of themes. This is sort of Claire with her present day account, and then her high school Claire account. And one of the things that we always loved about this is we explain the concept to people. It's like, okay, you create a special Twitter account as your high school self. We're all going to be in high school together for a month. And the reaction was always nearly identical. People would go, ha ha ha, and then their faces would drop, and they would, as the real actual trauma and angst of high school would come flooding back to people. So it again was both funny and had a sense of depth to it. It was one of the ones that made me cry. And again, I don't think poorly of me, but it is. I always kind of like it as a creator when people say that by the end of a Netprov I was crying, because a little bit, because I got attached to the characters. But I invented a character from my old high school in California, but from the 40s, who was going to graduate right into World War II and not survive. And I just sort of made that up as a fiction writer. Then I started writing as him and did these long duets between high school Rob and this character and then present day Rob. And then by the end of the thing, it was like, why did I say he was going to die? What was I thinking? It's too sad. So anyway, so that's that effect that novelists often talk about in terms of their own work, which is to say that they create characters and then the characters have minds of their own and do not follow the author's instructions and just will go their own direction. That's something that by playing these collaborative games, lots of people can participate in that and have that kind of feeling. And I've heard people who don't consider themselves to be writers and who downplay their own creativity, as too many people do. They will tend to say that. And I guess that's another thing that I think is implicit in my thinking about Netprov, which is more people are better writers than they think they are. There's lots of people who is, oh, I'm not a writer, like have artificially created in their own minds barriers to creativity. And so, and that are not, and they're much better writers. Because again, how many, raise your hand if you have friends just in social media who commenting on current events or something will totally crack you up and say brilliant things in social media, right? It's like that's out there. And again, what's the difference between them and then sort of professional writers or full-time writers, however you want to define it? It's that trellis, I think. And I think we in Netprov can provide a trellis for things. So we have done Netprovs such as Spidey Show, which was, if anybody remembers the reality show The Hills, Spencer Pratt and Heidi Montag were kind of stars of that. And Spencer turned out to be one of Mark's students, and he loved Netprov. And they invited us, they gave us access to their real life 1 million follower social media accounts and asked us to do a Netprov with them. And so we imagined that they had a brand new TV show that nobody knew about. And we created a really pretty complete website for their show. And we just started live tweeting they themselves on their own official accounts with permission. We started live tweeting an imaginary TV show. So that's another kind of example. And in the book, there's recipes for doing that. It's a really fun starter Netprov. It's just, you say, we're going to all pretend that we're watching the same half-hour show, go, and you just start and you build the show either from a prompt. We have a generator that can give you a show name and a show title, or you can just go and invent it yourself. So one of the bigger projects that we did was a project that for my part of it was inspired by a student who said this as we were discussing kind of social media. And I am going to read a little bit from the book with your kind indulgence. And again, as an example of the kind of deeper dive that the book offers. So this is from the chapter called I Work for the Web, Revolution in the Feed. One fine day in 2015, Mark Marino put on a brave face in his Facebook account. For those of you asking how things have been going here at Facebook Department of Likes, generally everything is hunky-dory. Everywhere you look, there's someone throwing a thumbs up or flipping the zuck. But I've started noticing different kinds of likes, like the not so nice likes. And sometimes it seems like people feel obligated to do it, like they're afraid if they don't thumb up everything, they might miss some opportunity, lose some social media capital, which comes back to us as bonuses paid in Facebooks to use in the company store. So while all in all things are really swell, I'm starting to suspect something beneath the surface, though I try not to notice it. So mostly things are A-okay, which I just thought was just wonderful. It was just the pure impulse. And that sort of combined with, as Mark and I talked, with my students' observation. And so I'll read a little bit more. So this was the seed for the Netprov I Work for the Web. We thought back to the railroad robber barons of the 19th century and imagined the secretive company that owns the internet. Rockerhurst omnipresent bundlers. Its charismatic leader, the exployer, exploiter employer, Andrew Rockhurst Sr., whose handle on Twitter was Tycoonthropist. A great Mark Marino. So the Tycoonthropist launches a viral morale boosting campaign on Twitter called I Work for the Web, encouraging all social media users to celebrate and feel pride in the revenue their liking and reposting generates. The exploiter's website exhorted, and it's so easy you probably don't even know you're doing it. We gave you a stage to perform on. We let you upload your dreams and images to the clouds. So tell us your stories on Twitter and Facebook now. The stats don't lie. 38% awkward moments, 29% waiting on downloads, 66% friends ignoring you. It all means 100% time on device. We earn your attention. Be proud of your contributions, sending comic selfies, trying new emoticons, inventing new passwords, clicking celebrity teases, counting your likes, winning next level, retyping captchas. The wheels of the web turn on your generosity. You're welcome. Okay. We'll look at a few more slides from I Work for the Web. I can't help it. I'm gonna read another thing. This is another Mark Marino. It's from a presentation for I Work for the Web that Mark Marino made. The World Wide Web, every post, every selfie, every like, 50 billion posts each second. The work you do collectively could light up the entire world. Andrew Rockhurst Sr., he put the web to work for you. Just a twinkle in his eye, and has made it his life's work to build a cyberspace where work feels like play. Shout it loud, I work for the web. Instead of boosting morale and increasing donated productivity, the I Work for the Web campaign had the opposite effect. In the Netprov, ordinary web workers like you and me began to realize how much labor they'd been giving away in the form of clicks, likes, upvotes, and reposts. They balked at donating time and energy to help voice recognition algorithms improve through data gathering systems such as Apple's Siri and facial recognition systems authorized by clicking on interminable terms of service. So there starts to be a kind of union movement that uses the same hashtag, the International Web and Facetwit Workers Union, IWFW, that kind of takes over the feed. And so all of a sudden the thumbs up becomes not the thumbs up of Facebook, but the thumbs up of voting for the union. And then, of course, there are some anti-union people. And then this was a wonderful post created by Joan Rock, based on modeled on early 20th century Russian political posters, and there's the kind of the thumbs up vote, and then the official I Work for the Web account takes that image and turns it upside down, kind of disinformation moment. The union organizer posts this, and the Netprov ends with a kind of a fingertip walkout by the end of people leaving the protesting and leaving. And this was the web, one of the great characters just that came into play, the web waffler, who sort of waffled in their opinions, but then finally walked out on a waffle. So just wonderful, wonderful creativity. Another Netprov that kind of gives you an example of a deeper one that can go deep. And again, I would say that I really like the Netprovs that have what I call a swimming pool shape, which is to say that they start kind of fun and entertaining and comic, that invites people in. And then as they go on, they gradually get deeper and deeper in terms of content. And then again, nothing new about that. There's lots of work, creative work over the centuries that does that. But that's a shape that we like. So Airbnb is a way of renting out the down times in your life, the down moments. When you feel like checking out of your own life, check into someone else's. Why not turn your downtime into a timeshare? So again, by just simply modeling the literary form of it is just like Airbnb, right? It's just you post opportunities, you post what moments from your own life or from your character's own life, and you invite people to come, and then they write reviews. So the creative writing things are like writing the initial character of here's my time. And let me just read a tiny bit out of that from the book. And again, some of these things we're able to archive. Hang on just a second. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm gonna move on. But anyway, there's more about Airbnb in the book. Thermophiles in Love is a wonderful project that Kathy Podeswa, one of our key friends, Samara Haley Steele, was one of the chief creators of this one. Haley said that she is a LARP designer, so a live action role-playing game designer, which is again one of the many roots of Netprov, sort of this practice that you can think of it. It's when people go out in the forest for a weekend with swords and costumes and do things. But that's the simplistic version. There is wonderful Scandinavian LARP tradition that's much more kind of literary, deeper, and Haley is steeped in that culture. And she said that she had developed for a LARP, she had developed a 5-gender system based on real life cultures who have multiple genders, and that nobody was particularly interested in it. And Mark and I said, we're interested. That sounds really interesting. So we wanted to make it not about people, because that might get into things that were too sensitive, uncomfortable for people. So we made it microorganisms. So they're little tiny colorful microorganisms that hang out in hot springs, places like Yellowstone National Park. And we developed a dating website for them to try to find their perfect quadruple. And the mesos, it's kind of based on Haley's wonderful kind of creation of the five genders, which are both based on the biological variations of these one-celled organisms and on multiple human cultures. There is one of the genders is a sort of matchmaking at a kind of another level up from the other 4 genders, and that's the matchmaker connector character. So that's the meso. And as part of that, we have the way that Netprovs are promoted. We have little films. We do all the things that people do to promote a dating site. So there are little films, and the dating site, again, you write sort of your character, you have interactions with people, and then you report to the community about your dates as the relationships get better. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that there was actually a kind of an in-person physical component, because Mark and Haley did several versions of Thermophiles in Love live, and this is Haley conducting one at a conference, and these are all people playing, and her accounts, in her skillful hands as a LARP creator and a LARP director, people were able to do this kind of experimentation, a fun, gentle thought experiment that she reported, and I have some of this in the book, just kind of deep, moving experiences that people had. So again, the aims of literature can be achieved through these methods. So the last thing I'm very quickly going to just point at, because I would say this is one of the main things on my horizon now as I think about future Netprovs, is a reprise of a now a 10-year-old project, which is, and again, with Netprovs, it's a perfect example of the kind of things that I talk about in the book, about how for a writer, you publish one thing, it's done, it's out there, and then you move on to the next thing. In theater, the same piece can be done innumerable times. In Hollywood and TV, you can do updates and sequels that extend the story. So there's all of those ways of framing narrative film into this. So Grace, Wit, and Charm that we did initially 10 years ago can be reprieved, and we're intending to do a live Twitch version of it that we will tell you more about. But the idea of Grace, Wit, and Charm is it helps you with your online self-presentation. So if you want to move more smoothly and interestingly than the other characters in your video game, then we have people standing by. This is our hardy team standing by in motion capture suits, ready to do live performance of your character. So here's Kathy Pedeswa becoming a fearsome warrior. And then if you don't have a great sense of humor and you feel a little behind in the humorous banter of your group, we will ghostwrite jokes for you. And then Charm is for people who are somewhat kind of romantically impaired and want a little help, a little Cyrano help. The Cyrano service was one of the great money makers, is one of the great money makers for Grace, Wit, and Charm. So we help people kind of conduct their ghostwrite for them as they conduct their online romances. And the interesting thing about this is that I consider this to be kind of a full on Netprov with all the bells and whistles, at least that I can think of, in the sense that it takes place on Twitter and social media 24/7 throughout the period that it's running. And then the same characters that you've been reading about come to life in a theater for an hour every week. And so you get to see them. And they are at the exact, if you've been following in social media, they are at the exact point of the story that you see in social media. So, and I just as an ongoing thing, I would love to get a kind of a residency somewhere at a small theater where people do this ongoing improvisation in social media, and then you get to see them every week. So we're going to be experimenting with that as we go on. So these are, again, just a few images from the production. And this is the great costumes and set design, art direction, and video backgrounds that Joelle and Rock made for us that are just fantastic. So we started off with a little game, and this is my encouragement to everybody. And I want to just invite people to our brand new Netprov, which, yay, is launching today. That big plume of smoke you see on the horizon, don't be afraid. It's not anything scary. It's just this new Netprov launching. And I would like to read you, as my last little comment here, I would like to read you the invitation, which is the following. Grumple. Grumple is an imagined variant of last winter's smash hit word game, Wordle. But Grumple doesn't behave like an ordinary game. The results of play are curious, irreplicable, unpatterned, and that is making people grumpy. We in the Grumple community gather on the chat site Reddit to celebrate the odd victory, vent frustrations, and theorize the what's, how's, and why's of Grumple. Is it an intelligence test? An oracle? A rabbit hole? Whatever people think Grumple is, whatever people think of Grumple, Grumple is also a lightning rod and wrestling mat for the players to work out and work through their grumpiness. Join us. So Mark, I think we'll put in the chat. I really look forward to reading the Avalanche, how the Avalanche story worked out. Mark will put some Grumple links in chat. So again, essentially you just go in Reddit, and as the last little thing I'll say that there's a lot more about this in the book about how to kind of shape things. Grumple has a rough 3-act structure, but then given the nature of social media and so on, people can participate in any stage at any time. But we're going to kind of go with our featured players and the students. We're going to go through in a kind of a chronological way. But so Act 1 is basically kind of what's up with Grumple and sort of bragging and trying to figure out how it works and starting to theorize things. Then Act 2 is there start to be associated businesses and people start charging money to give away the answer and having add-ons. And so that's the stage we call ads, advertisements and add-ons. And then the final stage of Grumple seems to be the inexorable one that a real life version of something like that would come to, which is it becomes gambling site, and Grumple becomes this huge hub of online gambling. So those are the basic outlines of that. But and you're most encouraged, if you're intrigued by Netprov, come and play with us on Reddit. And we've found that sometimes that the time limits that Mark and I think of as being the limits of the Netprov, we don't have the power to say that. So even though our chance to participate full on may be briefer, we usually run Netprovs for about a month, and they do have kind of a bell curve shape, like they kind of take off in the middle of the month and then they trail away at the end. Anyway, thank you so much for letting me rattle on like this. I think maybe I will turn it over to Mark now and I'm glad to answer questions that anybody might have.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, we have to give Rob a round of applause. So you can unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat, or whatever. You give snaps or claps, or you can give waves as you wish. I think that was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful talk. And we're gonna sort of round things out at the hour. But as always, with these kind of talks, we tend to plan spillover time so we can chat a bit and play a little bit. That goes the extra half hour. But of course, whenever you have to check off, you can, or you will. You don't need my permission. So please queue up questions in the chat. The first question that we have comes to us from an audience member named Joellen Rock, Rob, who I believe you mentioned in your talk. And she asks, or she can always ask in person, but I don't know. Joellen, do you want to ask in person or want me to read it? Doesn't matter.
I have to go to a faculty meeting.
Okay. Now wait, now shouldn't Rob be at that faculty meeting too, just out of curiosity?
He's officially
Ixnay.
but yeah, if he has any tips about creating Netprov characters for newbies, and how one builds with the yes and onto the Netprov.
Those are both great questions and very, very deep. I would say sort of building characters, there's tons about that in the book. And that's probably the best reading the book. And again, it's free, everybody. You can get it. You can get to it for free, is the best way to do that. But the kind of yes and part, which as everybody knows is the kind of one of the fundamental tenets of the Chicago style improv, where you never say no to anybody's suggestion. You always build. You say yes and your creativity is in supporting the initial ideas and building up. So I talk a little bit about that, but I do have lists of tips of all kinds for Netprov players, and I'm just going to read. I won't read the details, but here's a high-level version of the kinds of tips, and I write at more length about each of these. But here's some tips. Play Netprov within earshot of other players if you can. So that means either like on Zoom or in person. It's a fantastic parlor game for an evening with friends to write together and talk. And we discovered that doing All Time High and Spidey Show and these other ones that we did with people around the world, that it's just a really fun thing. It's largely silent, but then people will chime in, and that's very encouraging. So you can also support by repeating. So if the social media platform allows you to retweet things, or then you do that. Like when somebody does something you like, you repeat it, or you copy and paste and repeat it. If you're within earshot of other players, you support by reading it out loud. That's maybe my favorite piece of advice for tripling the fun of writing Netprov. When you're writing with people and you can kind of read what you're all writing at the same time, whenever something makes you laugh or that strikes you, then read that part out loud. It has, I mean, I go into depth, but it has lots of wonderful supportive effects to the team. Very good things happen when you do that. So you support by voting if you have likes and thumbs ups and stuff. You support by quoting. You support by using emojis, stage directions, and other kind of phatic communication. For those of you who know that term, it's like the unspoken. It's like nods and thumbs ups, and yes, the crucial kind of interpersonal support. And emojis are built to do that in writing, and that gives other writers courage. Then obviously you support by reacting in the fiction, and like someone says something and then you start to build on their idea by interacting with them. You support by imitating them. You can support by extending an idea, taking it step by step, and you don't want to take it to absurdity instantly. You want to like ramp it up slowly and extend an idea slowly. And then I like to encourage people to give more feedback than you initially think you should. It's like everybody I would project is a little shy about their writing. It's not just students, but people of all ages. Oh, I'm not really a writer. Oh, I'm not really, so everybody needs encouragement. So just be encouraging people. Be patient. Let things develop. Don't worry. And if you got to that's the improv thing. If it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to, you got to let go of that and go the way it goes, just like real life. And then be real. All your characters are parts of you. So have your characters and their interactions be real in a way that harmonizes with your own feelings. Anyway, that's a rambling answer, but hopefully that was addressed that issue.
Those are great answers, and again, I've experienced that effect back when we were doing Spidey Show. That's the first time I really remember us doing that. So Spidey Show happened at what was it, 8:00 on Thursdays in some time zone. I'm not even.
I think in yours, yes, I think it was like 10 here and 11 on the East Coast.
But I was in Europe at the time. But I remember Zooming before Zoom. I was Skyping into your house where you had writers gathered around the table, and I think that was one of the times where we were experiencing the social aspect of Netprov in real time.
It was so fun, and it's again for me personally that those images that you saw of the Invisible Seattle novel under construction, where it's just like, what do we do now? What happens? Somebody has suggested that this character go this way. What do we? And you have to sort of decide in real time of kind of living characters what to do. To me, that's just an amazingly fun, challenging discussion. But to me, it just feels like I'm activating every part of myself, my mind, my heart, everything I know about history and the history of art, everything I know about. I can try to understand about people, like what should happen with this character, what can happen with the story. So I just think that's super fun. And then obviously, and Jean Tramick again, who's still here, I believe, she knows this too. It's like she just was constantly cracking us up, and it's just fun. It's a very fun evening.
So Rob, we have a question in the chat that you might not have expected. Johanna asks, can you give us a real quick capsule definition of improv in the improv you're referencing here?
Okay. So and there's a chapter about the theater history of improv. So improv in theater terms has two main roots. One is an old European tradition that we know through its Italian form of commedia dell'arte. It's a kind of comic theater with masks and costumes and stock characters that century after century are the same characters. And in commedia dell'arte, there are outlines of stories, but there's no script. And the actual words and the specific actions of any given performance are always improvised. The actors make it up on the spot. And it's very different from the main tradition of European theater, which is memorizing the lines and pretty much, you bring it to life each time, but the goal is to have pretty much the same performance each time the performance is done. So that was something that everybody it was always an outlier, is my sense, and theater people can correct me, but that there was this tradition for a long time. And one of the things I love about Commedia dell'arte is that it apparently is one of the few art forms that goes back to ancient Greece, kind of one of the fountainheads of European culture, in an unbroken tradition. And people believe that the Commedia dell'arte characters that we know may have been the identical characters, and that the Greek masks were a version of that. We don't know for sure, I think, but there's that sense. So the second route of improv was started in the mid 20th century in Chicago with women working in immigrant housing facilities with immigrant children, and doing kind of after school and supportive activities for immigrant children. And one of the things they wanted to do was teach these children who had all kinds of different linguistic backgrounds and so on. They help them put on plays. And so a woman by the name of Viola Spolin came up with a set of exercises of how to train kids to loosen up and be creative and be actors. And that core set of exercises, and there are lots of things like, and they have a lot of the principles embedded in them. Like, it's just the thing that we did at the very beginning in writing in this things. I just posited this avalanche scenario, and then people could jump in. So those exercises were not only really good at educating people for theater, but they were really fun in themselves. And so Viola Spolin's son in Chicago decided to create a theater where people would do on stage just those exercises, and do some skits. And that was called the Second City Theater in Chicago. And it turned out that those playful, simple things could have this rich full-on thing. So most American improv shows are partly things where they'll ask for an idea from the audience. And my favorite example of this is stolen from a Howie Mandel's stand-up routine. They'll say, okay, give me a character to be, cowboy. Tell me where I am, spaceship. Now give me a bunch of funny things to say. so but that was but it's more like you get a situation. So I'm a cowboy on a spaceship, and then what happens, and the people improvise from that. And then from that, other people, Del Close, began to make a kind of a long form thing, which is built with a structure kind of like Western classical music structures, where things are repeated and the same melody appears later on. And so that's called the Herald. So anyway, I could go on and on, but does that help? Does that basic answer help?
Yeah.
I got you correct, please. Another thing that is also when I play with the other time, when I play the Netprov for the first time that I have encountered with, is just like moving from one place, to another, to into another place, like using hyperlinks to connect pictures and the locations.
Yeah.
Please, what are the tools? What are the components that, like, programming language that you employ in creating Netprov?
That's a great question, because there are many types of electronic literature where people are able, which I'm not able, and willing to create new digital tools who can program things. So like Andrew in this crowd, there are people here who can make things in code. I cannot. So my sense of the things that I like to do in Netprov is take an existing platform, and it's essentially defined for me as what people are using right now at this point in time. So right now in America, people use Reddit for discussions of things. If they're going to write about Wordle, they're going to do it on Reddit as one of the places that they do it. So we will take what I like to call available media. So I thought long and hard about that term because it's sort of, this and that and the other. But another way of saying it is that I consider us to be cuckoo birds of platforms. And so the cuckoo bird is notorious for laying its eggs in other birds' nests. It's a very kind of aggressive and territorially expansive species that lays its eggs in other birds' nests. That's what personally, that's kind of what I think. So essentially the answer is, if I've got any moment in time, if you come up with a Netprov idea, just you pick a platform that most of the people that you want to invite to play can already use, and then you build it in there. That's my answer.
Well, it does give us some challenges from time to time when it comes to the archiving stage.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes Twitter will decide it works differently, et cetera, et cetera. So, but again, that's kind of the challenge of doing business in the digital age. I think people encounter that in various forms. Rob, I have a question which came up in my class, which is, so the students felt that Netprov lives on a continuum as presented in your book, that goes from sort of these high concept, high premise, and maybe a set of rules and a platform like we do sometimes with our Netprovs, all the way on that one side of the spectrum, all the way to you post something on Instagram and it's like there's some tension between the picture and the whatever you write in the comment, right? Or maybe you have
one single post things,
right? And the question was, or really all of our internet lives perhaps being a kind of Netprov, and certainly I may live my life that way, I'm not sure, but or someone whoever's inhabiting this avatar seems to do that from time to time. But the question that came up was, when does it start or stop being literary? Or what helps it? What are the conditions under which it starts to seem more like something somebody would call literary? Or is it all literature?
That's a great question. Well, here are my thoughts about that. What's considered literary is generally something that happens later, and that is the function essentially of critics and curators, critics and anthologists. And the thing that I like to point out to my students, and I hope I have in the book somewhere, because it's a touchstone moment in English language literary history for me, is that the century in which neoclassical rules for how you do plays were in force. And essentially for a century, few, if anybody, people produced Shakespeare. Shakespeare was nearly forgotten. And then Shakespeare gets revived by the actor Garrick because he's good at Shakespeare, and he sort of has a big centennial or bicentennial celebration of Shakespeare, has a big festival to try to and the sense of Shakespeare as being the great English language author was sort of created later at one point after a century of Shakespeare being ignored or considered too sexy, too violent, not literature. Shakespeare was not, it was pop for that period. Shakespeare was considered pop culture and not literature. So it's the answer to a young creator saying, is this literature or not? I would always say, try to make it as good as you can, and then just leave it to the future to decide. And the other moment that I just love time and time again in literary history is that the things that people do for fun, like Voltaire's Candide is one example, that was just a little side project he did for fun. It was not at all literature. The literature for him was his plays. And again, talk about plays, like couldn't be more part of French culture than Voltaire. Almost nobody produces his plays. They're just tedious and unwatchable to a contemporary thing. So the thing that he thought was art is no longer considered art. And the thing that he did as a fun thing for his friends and a throwaway thing, that is the thing that becomes now the popular thing. But who knows in the future? So, that's why it's just the same, in all the, whenever I'm working with young creators, I just say, you got to do your best and not worry about the reception, because the reception changes over time. But that's the importance of archiving. You want to give it, ideally, you give it half a chance to survive by trying to archive it a bit and kind of, spread the archives around in terms of digital things. So there's always a phase in every Netprov where Mark and I just sit for hours and copy and paste stuff out of Twitter or something like that, because we can't count on them. I mean, they've deleted most of our Netprov accounts because they think that they're frauds. So that's interesting. Anyway, so sorry for that long rambly answer.
Well, I'm waiting for other questions to queue up, but while I'm thinking of it, let's we should return to the avalanche for a second too. But, but before we get there, I do have a question, which is, Rob, have there been like big lessons you've learned along the way that like where you had a definition of Netprov and then something happened in one of the Netprovs and you're like, you know what, I now need to add this to the way we play these things, because I'm noticing something that you already gave an example earlier with reading things aloud in a live context. That's something that helps. But were there other realizations you had that kind of turned the ship or made you sort of tinker with the definition or how you presented it to people?
Yeah. There's tons of them. And I it feels like the book is littered with them. But when I was talking earlier about that slide that I showed, the Venn diagram of all the different kind of forms of cultural creating that Netprov is kind of at the center point, that's something that to me represents a ton of those moments. So for example, at an electronic literature conference, we saw this cool presentation by a guy who was from mostly a theater background, who did a performance which was based on earlier, not very good versions of voice recognition. So he had improv actors stand on the stage with microphones, and the microphones fed into a computer, and they would say lines out loud, and the computer would turn them into written language, but inaccurately. It would always make lots of mistakes. So the rule of it as an improv performance was that they had to go with what the machine said. They couldn't do, if the machine misunderstood them, they had to forget their own original idea and do the thing that was up on the screen. So and he was describing this as like, yes, this is so Netprov. I mean, again, not that we try not to be syncretic, that, everybody's doing Netprov, but they don't know it. But no, people do other things. But there are certain things that Netprov is a handy label for the things that we like, a group of things that we like. But in the course of describing this, he said, yeah, and then a lot of things came out in rehearsals, and I went, wait a minute, rehearsals? Because as Netprov writers, we never rehearse. At that point, we were like, oh yeah, you just like, you come up with this idea and then you start writing, and it's based on a writer's vision of how things go. There's rehearsal. He goes, oh yeah, we rehearse for about 6 weeks, four times a week for about 6 weeks, because that's what you do with a play. They're theater people, and you rent a theater and you have a rehearsal room, and that's what you do with a play. Like, people from the theater background, they come with that structure. And I was like, damn, it's like, imagine that. I think maybe we would be a little bit better if we actually rehearse. So out of that was born these kind of behind the scenes, the Netprov featured players list, and what we call the text kitchen, which is sort of our test kitchen. And now, like, my students and I in the last few weeks have been doing lots of Grumple just to take it out for a test drive and see what kinds of things that basic premise will do. But that idea would never have occurred to me.
So it's rehearsal, but it's kind of play testing sort of too,
right.
Kind of
yes, play testing. Yeah, right. Because and then game people are always go like, well, what's the data on how people react to your things? And we go, data? Like, I don't know. Like, it's like poets, when you give a poetry reading, you don't pass out a questionnaire and right. have people rank you on a table of 5 variables from 1 to 5 or something like that. But game people are all about testing and all about testing. So there's just you're just, I don't know, I think we're constantly learning from these other fields, from game world, from all kinds of worlds. Yeah, I mean, we learned this invaluable thing. Mark and I were at a conference with game people, and Jason Morningstar, who is a wonderful game creator, he shared this just brilliant thing that I wish I could put in the book, and I learned it too late for this round. But he said, yeah, when I'm playing a game at a game conference, it's like I'll always say, okay, we here at table 11, we love each other, we support each other, and we're going to treat each other great as we can. And that's a butchering of his thing, but he just says that straight out. And it was like, wow, that is such a good idea. And I'm using now versions of that with my students. We're going to be a supportive community. We're going to help. But he was it was so from the heart. And so he had done that so many times. It was like, wow, that is really, thank you. That is a great thing to learn.
Yeah, that reminds me of Haley's ways people had of signaling when they didn't feel safe.
Right.
Yes. In the cueing we gave them of, leave when you if you don't feel comfortable with something, you're able to leave without any questions asked, that sort of thing. Those were things we borrowed from LARPing, I remember too.
Yeah.
That were very helpful.
Yeah. So yeah, there's just it is, it's gonna be, I think something is going to come from that central area of the Venn diagram. There's several kinds of things, and it kind of depends on if there's more theater people, it'll be more like that. If there's more game people, it'll be more like that. And I think the fun thing over the years is that Mark and I'll speak for myself, but I always feel kind of like the odd person out with the literary background. It's not as, there are fewer people from I encounter fewer people from literary backgrounds than from any of those other backgrounds doing that. Because I just think there's such a strong tradition of the cabin by the lake and the individual writer, and in the literary tradition, there's not that much of a collaborative, an acknowledgement of all the collaboration. There's been tons of collaboration, of course, over the years, and feminist scholarship has really brought that out. All the wives and girlfriends who had crucial participation in famous works and never get credited. That's just a tip of the iceberg of unacknowledged collaboration in writing. But the culture of writing is still pretty individualistic.
That's interesting. Okay, well, we have a few more minutes. Does anybody have a final question? And then if they don't, we do have a few snippets from our Avalanche Netprov we can share, we can read aloud if people would like to hear those. Well, even if they don't, I'll probably just read them. But any last questions before we switch into that? Hold on, I see one down at the bottom. No, it's a comment by Johanna, which yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, yellow cards and red cards. It's a great system.
And the context of in case people can't see the chat, the context of the comment was that we should carry around yellow and red cards when people commit,
like in soccer,
social violations of various kinds. Okay, well we'll get a couple of the snippets from the Avalanche Netprov that we're building up in the chat. We had one from Jennifer Webb, who wrote, "I was looking for a getaway and loved to sit in lodges while others ski. Oops, wasn't prepared for the avalanche. Maybe I'm still looking for who I am in life. That might be why I came to this mountain." Oh, I wonder where that story is headed.
There we go.
Andrew Klobuchar writes, "I'm Jacques Diggerout, and I study avalanches. And this lodge is due for a big one. So I'm here to study the impact."
There we go. Oh.
And Colleen writes, "Looking for good opportunities too. Want to lift on yours." I guess I wrote, "I am worried that this avalanche is just a metaphor for the state of my life. I wish it were a simile." Anna Knocker writes, "I desperately want to get properly snowed in. Who am I in life? This and that." And then we have another Andrew Klobuchar. "Well, similes are valuable experiences. They should be noted, but that's an entirely different department in my college." Gene Shramick writes, "Coffee, it's nature's Ritalin." And then I guess I wrote, "When you really need a shovel, but all you have is a straw." Leonardo writes, "I study metaphor and came to these slopes to research snow-based metaphors, only to suddenly find myself caught in a very literal one. And then Joellen Rock writes, with a backpack full of clay, I'm hiking back to the small Swiss village where the folk potters I descend from make decorative tiles for alpine stoves to heat their beds. I can't wait to climb in. Liz Wiley writes, I do snow sculptures at Mitch Tech. Wanted to get a better understanding of structure. And Andrew writes, being snowed in can be a source of comfort. At least that's what they tell me. Oh, we got one more from Liz. And I'm thinking of moving my, now she did write snot sculptures. I feel bad that I read it. I corrected that in my mind, but it does say snot sculptures.
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted now.
Yes,
Yeah. So was it snot sculptures, not snow sculptures?
In my usual typos, I was saying, I do snow sculptures up at Michigan Tech, and then it typed out a snot. And I thought, just like you're saying, I had to go with the flow of that and go, perfect. Okay, I'm not going to do snot sculptures. I'm going to do snow now.
Right. Which would, a serious snot sculptor would want temperatures below freezing, right, for their work, right? So it makes sense. It completely makes sense. Right?
They often go hand in hand, Liz, right?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of snot sculptures. Now that's a whole thread of that Netprov could come out.
It's a Netprov for the kindergarten age.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
For more, all the way through middle school. Actually, really all of our lives, to be honest.
Yes, that's right.
I'm sure we could get big audiences that way. And also, Rob, you should know in the chat there was a lot of follow-up discussion, largely led by Jean, about whether there should be scoring at poetry readings.
Okay.
She said those would be welcome, and so there was some back and forth about that. You should know as well.
Yeah, which is essentially what slam poetry is.
Oh, yeah.
Slam poetry is a sports, a way of organizing poetry reading according to sports. It was kind of a way, I think, this is my own little hip pocket theory, and others can correct me. It was a way of kind of making it okay for men to read poetry.
Yeah, and
because it was sort of, it had a little bit of a manly men.
I mean, I think it's also made room for like people of color and things like that. Yes, as slam poetry has evolved, it's blossomed
into a whole thing in it. Yeah, a whole beautiful art form in itself. But yeah, that's just based on my observations of some of the early Chicago ones that I saw.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we probably should wrap up.
Thanks everybody for coming.
So once again, let's those of you here, let's give unmute or whatever. We're gonna give a round of applause for Rob, and we're really excited to read this book. I should mention, of course, remind you that it's available for free, and I think it'll also be available for pay at some point, Rob. That's the plan, right? The print version will be available.
Yeah, I don't have the funds yet to start paying readers, but I really want to try. I'm aiming for that. Going to write some big grants and stuff. So,
and we do encourage all of you to join us in the April Netprov called Grumple, which is already underway on Reddit. You can just go to bit.ly/play-grumple, and you'll be right on the Reddit. And there is a daily Grumple game that people can play along with. And then if you'd like to be added to the ELIT monthly reading group mailing list, just send me a little note. Let me think if there's anything else and also in the ELO, the next, all caps, the next museum/archive/website, there is a new exhibit of the Filter Zine, I should mention, which is an Instagram-based zine that was co-sponsored, whose origins were co-sponsored by the Electronic Literature Organization. And again, the biggest thing I want to say is I hope you continue to find joy in some Netproving, and I look forward to joining in with you all. Rob, any last words? We give you the last word.
No, I could. You said it beautifully. Yeah, come play.
Okay.
Come. In the words of one of my favorite old Invisible Seattle phrases, come astonish us.
Nice. Come astonish us. All right. I will stop the recording now.